Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and welcome to the third in a series of panels focusing on different career paths and opportunities available to folks with degrees in biological anthropology, organized by the Anthropology Women's Mentoring Network, or BAWMN. Today, we have three fantastic panelists joining us to discuss their journeys and experiences in data science. Past panels have focused on science communication and museums, and we'll have another panel focusing on forensics later this spring. Our programming is entirely funded by voluntary contributions, so if you enjoy this content and find it helpful and you're in a position to make a donation, no matter how small, you can go to bawmn.org and click donate. On the website under professional resources, you can find a link to online profiles of a number of colleagues trained in bioanthropology pursuing different alt-ac careers, as well as videos from our first two panels on science communication and museums. So as I mentioned today, we are delighted to be in the company of Marisa Macias, LaShanda Williams, and Renee Willmon. Marisa is a consulting data scientist at Pfizer. LaShanda is a bioinformatician and R-Shiny developer at EMD Serono, and Renee is the director of Self-Care Catalysts. So going in alphabetical order, Marisa, would you like to go ahead and get us started?
Sure. Hi, I'm Marisa. I got my PhD in evolutionary anthropology in 2015. I did a postdoc for 2.5 years, and then at that point, I pivoted to data science. I did a boot camp here in New York City where I was already based. And then since then, I've had a few different consulting gigs. I've worked in telecommunications, health, and municipals are the three areas I've wound up in. Like I said, currently I am at Pfizer. I work in quality assurance and safety, which is sounds boring, but actually isn't. It's actually very complex, looking at all of the factors that go into what keeps everything Pfizer makes safe, from the laboratories to the clinical trials to the manufacturing. And yeah, I don't know if you want a lot more detail about my background now, or if we want to go into it later, or I guess what would be most useful for me to share right now.
Do you think maybe you can explain a little bit about like the boot camp you did and kind of how you transitioned out of academia into your current career path?
Yeah, sure. So during my PhD, I already kind of had, my research incorporated geometric morphometrics and also some modeling and simulation. So I'd already been developing a lot of programming skills and sort of advanced statistical skills. So I knew that that was actually one of my options. I had a friend who had actually gone from academia into industry through data science through the same boot camp that I did, which is Insight. Insight's changed a bunch since I did it, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it in the same way that I would have before, because the format has changed and it's changed so much I'm actually not as familiar with how it works now. But regardless, that was very focused on people coming from academia going into industry. So it was very useful because they taught me a lot of things like how to make a one-page resume, how to interview. I learned a bunch of things about what are typical questions, what is a typical data science interview like. So it's very helpful in that way. In spite of that, I ended up actually having to find all of these jobs. The program did do a lot of introductions to companies, and I had a lot of close calls, but I ended up finding these jobs on my own through my network. So what I ended up doing was sort of reaching out to a lot of people and saying hey, I'm looking for a job, like people I knew from undergrad, people I'd known from other parts of my life. I didn't go straight from undergrad to grad school. I took 3 years off and worked, where I met some more people. I wasn't working in data science, but it was helpful to have those other contacts from outside of academia. But in any case, it was just sort of pounding the pavement and letting people know I was looking and I was interested, and also being willing to do a lot of informational interviews where I got introduced to someone who worked in data science or worked with data scientists, and just sort of asked them more about what do you do, what's your job like, what do data scientists do at your company. And that was actually very helpful because I kind of picked up a lot of the terminology of how to talk about my research in a way that made sense in industry, which was not a skill that I had really mastered at that point. And I also just got very good at like combing like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Indeed, like the main sites, and like looking for jobs, and then using my own network to see, do I know anyone who works at that company in any capacity? Can they make an intro? Can they make a recommendation? Even just reaching out to them and saying like, what's it like to work where you work, and finding out more about it. So that was sort of my path. And I've jumped around, as I said, I partially through consulting, some permanent positions. And that's kind of how I've made the transition every time. Almost every time it's been because I knew someone who worked at the company and they made an intro, or at least could tell me more about what it was like to work there and give me a sign about whether I would actually want to work there. I end up using the main skills I use, aside from like the coding skills I acquired over the course of my degree and that I beefed up on my own over time, was, you know, I think sort of the myth of academia is like you only know how to do what you know how to do, but like, especially in bioanthropology, in my experience, like we're allowed a lot of free reign over choosing our degree and our question. In some places like physics or biochemistry, you're given a project and you execute the project that your PI designed for you. And that's fine, but that's not really how anthropology works, at least for a lot of people I know. You write your own question, you design your project soup to nuts. So you have very skills in scientific thinking, like a loose idea, how do you answer with data, what do you do, how you move forward, and like being able to say that that's a skill that I have, and actually other people applying for these data science jobs who maybe come from a physics or an engineering background don't necessarily have as strong, is one of the things that helped me stand out. So I would say that that was one of the real feather in my cap, that once I kind of figured out how to talk about that, that made me a stronger candidate. I'd say the other thing that made a biggest difference was because I'd done my postdoc at the American Museum of Natural History, I had done some outreach, and I'd done outreach during my degree, and I had gotten very comfortable with talking about science to a variety of audiences and being able to say, I can talk to someone in business who hasn't taken statistics since the 7th grade, is also a useful skill that I was able to manage, and like makes me attractive, especially in this position now where I work with a lot of business people who are not very technical, and I can break things down for them in ways that make sense for them, and also explain to them like, here's your question, here's the data we use, here's how that answers your question. So I hope that kind of gives you more insight into how I got here.
Yeah, and we have heard from almost every single one of our panelists so far that science communication and be able to, talk to the public and translate that research and information into something that like any person off the street can understand is one of the most important parts of their job. LaShanda, would you mind giving your background?
Sure. So my background, at least as an undergrad, was in anthropology and sociology. I went to VCU, and their anthropology program was, I guess, sort of new at the time. So it was very filled, very general. And they sort of gave us permission to take all sorts of classes outside of the major. So I kind of came out with probably the equivalent of like a humanities type of degree. After that, I took a year and a half off to work as a substitute teacher, special ed, which was, in hindsight, very useful. And sort of during that time, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. At the time, I was very interested in skeletons and skeletal biology, so I applied to and was accepted into NYU's skeletal biology master's program. Of course, while I was there, I decided to change my mind and punt towards genetics. So I worked with Todd to sort of create a pivot that made sense. And it's pretty timely now because this was in 2014 when the MERS virus had just hit the United States. So that turned out to be pretty useful, especially today. I actually got my PhD in ecology and evolution because I really wanted the sort of quote unquote hardcore sort of science education, but I also wanted to work with more diverse students. So within ecology and evolution, my department, you had people who were studying bees and birds and all kinds of things. So it was very sort of an edifying experience. After that, I did a postdoc at Albert Einstein College of Medicine. My PhD dissertation was on the human oral microbiome. And Albert Einstein was expanding their microbiome center and trying to figure out ways to implement new technologies and streamline their bioinformatics. So that's what I did for about a year there. While I was there, I will say that their professional sort of career services offerings were just top notch. Because I'm sure like many of you all, I didn't know that there were options outside of academia, or how to even begin to sort of make that switch. And within, I would say, maybe 6 months of consistently going to different meetings and things and seminars, I was able to get the job that I currently have, which is as a bioinformatician and R-Shiny developer. So R-Shiny is basically a web application. My sort of primary job description is science communication, actually. So to interface between, the people who are sort of hardcore bioinformaticians and the actual sort of bench scientists that want to know, okay, what are my results without having to learn how to code. And R-Shiny is really good at doing that. I enjoy my job, it's fun. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. So I know you said that you were able to get training at Albert Einstein, and I'm not too familiar with that college. Do they, I guess, is it like a typical institution, like a four-year institution, or?
So it's a medical school.
Okay.
Yeah, so I didn't actually pay much attention to the actual medical students or the graduate students that were there, because actually most of the people who work there were postdocs, and I think that's why their sort of career services were so rich.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I guess would it be fair to say that they were really more concerned about like getting you guys out in the real world and focusing on like jobs rate success than like trying to send you back into academia?
Yeah, I think the former. I think they were very interested in making sure we got a job when we were done, which is not what I got in graduate school.
Yeah. Yep, I
So,
understand that.
yeah.
Great. That's a very refreshing view. I wonder if that has to do with the fact that it's a medical school, and so I would guess they probably, since they're pumping out all these doctors and they're obviously not going into academia, that's why they have that viewpoint.
Yeah.
Interesting, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Renee, would you mind doing your background?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm based in Canada. I live in Toronto. So I've been studying I did my undergraduate and master's degree at the University of Toronto, and I did a joint program that was forensic science and anthropology. At the time I started my undergrad, it was the only university in Canada that had a forensic science program. But during part of that double major, I also became very interested in paleopathology. So my research, since my honors thesis in undergrad, took a track where I was considering paleopathology as well. So I always had kind of as a fallback to wanting a traditional academic career, as potentially doing something related to health, public health, medical research, something like that. So by choosing research questions early on that had the ability to pivot, I think that was part of my ability to relatively easily pursue different opportunities. And then I also continued to do forensic consulting, and I still do some of that today alongside my more corporate job, I suppose, doing cold case investigations and consulting with the province's coroner system and various police departments. So like Marisa mentioned, having that experience of talking to many different stakeholders, from investigators to coroners to victims' families, and being able to translate not only the science, but kind of frame things for those different perspectives has helped a lot in my career. I began a PhD program jointly between Western University and the École Pratique des Hautes Études, which is a university in France under a co-tutelle arrangement. And my PhD research has been about the evolution of tuberculosis and to what extent micro-CT examination of skeletal structure can reveal differences in evolutionary origins of disease, and also detecting some of those skeletal changes attributed to tuberculosis earlier on. And so as part of my research, I had to learn, some statistics, some paleoepidemiology, the imaging physics behind how to use the micro-CT equipment and interpret those images. I studied anatomy with the medical school. So I had a fairly broad background that allows me to communicate with the different stakeholders that are kind of related to my current job. So I'm currently the director of data science at Self-Care Catalyst, which is a small health technology company based in Toronto. I'd say when I was hired about 4 years ago, we were considered a startup. We were in the J&J Accelerator program in Toronto. And now I think you could say we're a scale up. We currently are using our technology platform to conduct some of the COVID vaccine surveillance studies, and collecting a lot of really interesting and rich data. And that's part of why I have my job. I actually didn't have to look for my job. I was very fortunate that as the result of trying to prepare for the job market, I followed a lot of the different online resources, like Karen Kelsey's The Professor is In, stuff to prepare for the academic job market. And in tandem, there's a program, I'm not sure to what extent it still operates or it's useful, called The Cheeky Scientist, which prepares mainly STEM students for industry jobs. So based on just a webinar, free webinar that I took on how to frame your LinkedIn profile for non-academic positions, the CEO of my current company reached out to me and asked if I would be available to help with a consulting project where they needed an anthropologist. And there was still a strong consulting component to the company at that time, and we were working with Roche, which is a large pharma company, to help one of their business units adapt to a change in their organizational structure. So they wanted someone to give a small workshop on kind of culture and what that meant in the workplace. So despite it being outside my comfort zone and my area of real expertise, I took up the opportunity to help them out, and then began a relationship with them that's lasted now 4 years. So I think there's a degree of kind of openness to considering things that are beyond your specific expertise and thinking about how you can pivot your skills. That's really important. The type of data that we collect now, the reason our company is gaining so much traction in the pharmaceutical industry is that rather than using traditional questionnaires or data that's held in medical records, we have an app that collects data from people about their experience as a patient that ranges from not only their medical record type of data, but also their mental health, their circle of support, what are the community resources that they have access to, how do they feel about the decision-making process they engage with their physician, and really much more broadly, what does it mean to be a patient with a given condition or multiple conditions? Because most clinical trials systematically exclude people who have multiple conditions, but in the real world, people are much more complicated. We have multiple conditions, there are different lifestyle factors, social determinants of health, that all come into play. So we end up with a very, by clinical research standards, very messy and unstructured data set. And so the biostatisticians within the Pfizer and kind of EMD Serono, Roche, those big companies that we serve, on the client side, the data scientists and the biostatisticians, the physicians or pharmacists who I work with, or health research professionals, are not familiar with how to work with that data. So for me, having had training in biostatistics and anatomy allows me to speak their language. I can talk to the physicians with relative ease about the pathophysiology of the diseases that they're trying to develop drugs to treat. But at the same time, I can help contextualize things through a biocultural lens and demonstrate how having a human perspective of the lived experience of disease is going to be important to them for developing things like patient support programs. How can you make the reimbursement process go more smoothly? What are the types of side effects or mental health concerns that you need to think about and support beyond just a physiological repercussion or of their, their target product? So it's wildly different from, studying micro CT scans of skeletal lesions, but it was actually my forensic background that made my boss reach out to me. She figured that, she tried to hire multiple traditional data scientists who'd really struggled and said, the data you have isn't possible to analyze. It's too unstructured. It's just a bunch of random data points and you can't tell a story with this. But she figured that if someone who knows statistics, but who has experience, attending outdoor crime scenes, making do with the evidence you have, as opposed to being able to design, a gold standard clinical trial, those skills would be transferable. And that's been the case. And my job is, very different every day. We work with patient organizations like the Allergy and Asthma Network or Heart Failure Society of America to develop programs for their patients. And then the data that's generated from that can be used by pharma companies, by health systems, hospitals, to help them meet those patients' needs better. So I feel I get to play a really unique role at the intersection of all of these health sector players to improve the experience for patients.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Go ahead.
Sorry, no, just what Renee had said reminded me of another thing I think about a lot, which is that, your willingness to say, oh, okay, I'll do this, even though you didn't feel like it was something that was already perfectly in your wheelhouse, is something that was really hard for me to get comfortable doing with initially. Like going into industry is, I feel like in academia, you're trained to be like, oh, well, I'm not an expert on that. I'm only an expert on this little thing. And that can really undermine you in an interview in industry where you're expected to say, yeah, I know it. And saying, yeah, I know it doesn't mean I know every single thing on earth about it. But like getting a lot more comfortable with saying, yes, I can do that. Yes, I'm familiar with that. Yes, I want to try that. Yes, I have experience with that, was something that took me a little while to figure out that it was important. Like the standard by which you say, yeah, I know about that. Yeah, I can do it is very different than it is when like you're talking to all people with PhDs and like very specific things. So I just want to point out that it was great that you did that. And that was something that was difficult for me to learn.
Thanks. Yeah, no, that's definitely been the case as well. And whenever I work, we partner with the university's Masters of Health Informatics program and have interns every summer. And that's something that, we really need to help coach them on frequently, is that, yes, you have the skill and it can be applied here. And when you start to get familiar with the different roles within industry, people change from department to department all the time and learn a completely new skill set. And if you start exploring things like LinkedIn, you'll see people who may have started out in marketing and who are now in a completely different business unit, and they've picked up the skills to make those pivots along the way. And similarly, taking that first kind of step outside your comfort zone into industry. It doesn't have to be stepping right into your long-term dream job right away, but kind of leapfrogging and picking up different skills along the way, you can eventually end up in a really interesting place. And the other thing about data science is, you know, what LaShanda was talking about, the R Shiny program, there are so many different programming languages, there are so many different applications. Whether you're interested in the data science and the type of data and the type of question, you're happy for that to be agnostic, is there are completely different opportunities than whether you're interested in a particular data set and what questions you can answer with that data. So there's quite a diversity within data science of where you can go and what skills you may want to pick up. And they're always evolving. So it's something that definitely also requires the type of kind of continuous learning and continuous improvement mindset to be able to jump in, and then to stay up to date is something else entirely.
Yeah, it definitely makes me think of my job, which is not data science, but how, you know, your boss doesn't like hearing, no, you don't know how to do something. And also kind of like what Marisa was saying, if you think about it, just because you're not an expert doesn't mean you don't know it. And you probably know a hell of a lot more than everybody else in the room. So I don't know if that's imposter syndrome sneaking in or if that's just how things are, but yeah, it's definitely got to lift yourself up there. Renee, I think it's interesting that you kind of started out in forensics and you transitioned to data science, and you know, still doing data science, but you're also working on your PhD. How do you see your getting your doctorate affecting your career?
At this point, I mean, I think the specific topic is no longer specifically relevant to my day-to-day job. I had the opportunity to speak at industry conferences and travel to meet different customers, obviously in non-COVID times. And so from that perspective, having a different background than almost everyone else in the room who has either, you know, if they have a PhD, it's usually in, you know, health economics or pharmacy, if they're not a medical doctor. And so being a little bit of that different person in the room has been helpful. You know, I've opened more than one talk saying that if I can figure out what happened to a person based on skeletal remains, imagine what I can do with, you know, a lot of data about living people. It helps kind of open people's minds to the idea that this isn't something they're used to, but it is something that can help them achieve their business goals. And so at this point, I think finishing my PhD is going to be more just about the professional credibility. At the end of the day, unlike academic careers where your specific research is going to dictate which positions you can apply for, which departments are hiring for someone with expertise in a very specific niche. You know, I've come across people who have a PhD in, you know, history or English literature who have found their way into industry careers in the pharmaceutical sector. So it's not that common for people to ask what my research is specifically about unless they have heard, like, unless they know that I'm an anthropologist or that I don't, you know, fit in that way already. It's really just about, have you shown the tenacity to go through your program? And you know, it really just lends credibility at this point, I think.
I've also personally found that for whatever reason, like in the health and medicine adjacent industries, there's a lot more respect for academic PhDs than in more like tech-centric industries. And I don't know if that's because there is more overlap of like academic medicine and research in terms of how, you know, even like a health startup operates, but I've kind of been in a lot of interviews with a lot of different industries, and I found that like more tech or less health oriented, or they're like, why is your degree in anthropology? And they like do not see the connection. Whereas I found in interviews at like more health centered companies that they're like, oh, that's interesting. And they are able to sort of, you know, I'm able to discuss myself about what I see the connections between what I used to do and what I do now. But I've just found in health centric industries that they seem to get it a little bit more and also have a little bit more respect for it for whatever reason.
Do you think that each of you could kind of talk about what your typical day is like and like what your hours are like, how many meetings do you have traveling, what your focused work time is, things like that?
I'll go first. Yeah, I am in way more meetings than I ever was used to as a student. There are days when I'm in meetings for like 3 hours. There's some days where I'm lucky where I'm only in meetings for like an hour to 2 hours. It's also very different because depending on the company I worked at, but like people will ping you over like Teams or Slack or whatever, one of these messaging apps a lot to like ask you a quick 5-minute question, especially in these times when everyone is remote. But also even before, a lot of the places I've worked are very work from home friendly. So there's a lot of digital communication going on anyway, even if people are in the office. But like, there's a lot more time in meetings and talking to people face to face. There's not a lot, like, I have to be careful to defend my heads down programming time or time where I'm trying to like get things done. So it varies. I end up having to like talk to lots of different kinds of people. Like sometimes it's sort of like relaying info. Like I had a meeting with my team and then we're going forward and then I'm interfacing with the other team saying, this is the decision we've made. This is the data we're going to need from you, or this is the decision we've made. Here's your next step. The other types of meetings I have are like, I have professional development meetings with my boss one-on-one every week. Where we talk for half an hour to an hour, not just about what's going on, but like how this fits into my larger goals. I also, not at this position, at my previous position, I used to have a meeting with my boss's boss about once a month. And those were also sometimes about the project, but a lot of times more about bigger company stuff. When I was working more face-to-face, not these days, but I used to also make it a point to like make time to like have a lot more casual interactions with people that I work with but aren't directly in my group, because just from my experience, talking to those people and getting to know those people a little bit more helped me kind of see more like how my work fit into the company, but also like start thinking up new projects and coming up with new directions we might be able to go in. So I've found that to be making time to go talk to other people about what's going on and what they're thinking about has paid off for me.
Great. LaShanda, do you want to go?
Sure. I don't think I'm in quite as many meetings as you are, but there are a lot of meetings, I will say that, and that is quite different. Another thing that's different from academia is that, I don't know if it was my experience, but I felt kind of siloed and sort of isolated most of the time. Whereas in industry, there's a lot of sort of group oriented sort of tasks that you're doing. So there is a lot of that communication over teams and, people asking sort of like those little quick questions that don't take too much of your time. My schedule is pretty much, for the most part, probably 75% of it's structured by me. There still are a lot of emails. So sort of answering emails, actual coding, communicating, checking in with people, checking progress. We also use Teams, and that whole Microsoft suite is really, really good with sharing different documents and sort of referring back to things that you saw in meetings. So I would probably say I spend a significant amount of time using that as well. And of course, a decent amount of time just kind of Googling things and trying to figure out, on Stack Overflow, trying to figure out what I'm doing.
Can I interject and just ask, is there some sort of like expectations of travel that you've encountered during the course of your, in kind of the different positions that would, take you away from wherever your home base is and or something to work with or around?
So for me, I haven't really had to travel, I will say, so EMD Serono is sort of the North American branch of Merck. So we're based in Germany. So there's a lot of sort of early morning sort of meetings. And I think when I was hired during COVID, so I think that the potential of actually going to Germany is kind of on the table, but the actual North American branch is in Boston. So if I ever had to go there, I don't expect it to be too cumbersome from New York City.
Renee?
Sure. So in the last 2 months, I've been on maternity leave, but before that, during COVID, spending a lot of time in digital meetings. Because we're a small company serving really large companies, we have a lot of meetings. And because I'm often well positioned to be able to translate kind of the qualitative work that we do to various stakeholders on our customer sides, although my title is data science, I end up doing a lot of business development work, working with our customers to be able to understand what their needs are, talk about how we would design a study and the use of our digital platform to execute that study. So it's not uncommon for my day to be, 80% meetings. There's a lot of talking and putting together slide decks, customizing proposals, and so some of that work does happen outside of your traditional work hours. We are kind of a 9-to-5 company, but because we serve a lot of the large pharma companies and because some of our studies are with the global divisions, we'll have calls either really early in the morning or occasionally late at night if we're on a call with someone in Asia Pacific or with the European global head offices. I've also had the opportunity to travel to places like Basel, where a lot of the large pharma companies are based for things like a bid defense, which, so when you think about your skills in writing grants, in defending your research proposals that you develop in your academic studies, those all apply, especially if you're going to have any kind of business development role. I know that's not part of the data science specific panel, but being able to write clear proposals, to be able to articulate those to a wide audience and explain how you're going to meet your customers' requirements, especially translating how your plan for data analysis is going to achieve those objectives is really important. And then being able to present the results of some of our projects, either at academic conferences or industry conferences, are, it's very similar. We have a poster almost every year at ISPOR, which is a health research and health economics and outcomes conference that's pretty global. They have both North American and European conferences every year. So because we're a small company, I've had the opportunity to wear a lot of different hats, and as a result, do a lot of that kind of travel, and anyone in our company has that opportunity to put their hand up and kind of step up to do those kinds of activities. Obviously, now that I have an infant, once COVID is done and things go back to normal, I probably will be scaling back a lot of my travel. And now that we're also so used to doing things and having initial client meetings over Zoom as opposed to face-to-face, I think that will scale back kind of organically on its own. But I think my role has a lot more of that kind of travel opportunity relative to a traditional data science role. But if you find yourself in an industry where research and sharing that research at conferences is part of it, then opportunities for travel and presenting things like that, if it's not already part of your company culture, if it's something that someone was interested in doing, it's probably not that hard to make a case to get resources to do so, because it's always useful for marketing purposes for the company or to produce other collateral to be used for business development or just thought leadership in whatever space you're in.
That's an interesting point, Renee, and was going to be my next question is, I'm assuming all of you have been teleworking at least to some degree because of COVID. Do you think that you guys will be able to continue teleworking once we return to normal life, or do you think that you'll get pulled back into the office?
I think different companies have different perspectives. like Pfizer made an announcement that this past year has demonstrated that like the way we think about the workplace has to transform. And so they're sort of letting people kind of decide, they're kind of letting teams sort of dictate their culture, but the message is no one, unless you're working in a lab or you have a job where you necessarily have to be on site, no one should be expected to have to be on site 5 days a week ever again. My particular team, because we're spread across 3 locations in Connecticut, Jersey, and New York, even if it weren't COVID times, I wouldn't go into the office every day because most of my team isn't in New York. Like when, you know, when it returns to normal, whenever that is, we're gonna maybe meet once a week or once every 2 weeks in New York. And then the rest of the time I'll have the option to like come in as much or as little as I'd like to. For me, my personal preference is to be on site with my colleagues like 2 days a week at least, because there's just some stuff, especially if you're collaborating, it's like much easier for you both to have your eyeballs on the same screen and to like have more of those casual interactions and learn more about what people are kind of doing. I would be surprised at this point about any data science job that would insist you need to have your butt in a chair at the office 5 days a week. Just because this last year has established that that is really not necessary for most jobs like this.
I'll just say I agree.
Yeah, I think my company's in one of those examples where because we're a smaller team, and mostly because it's the sentiment of our CEO, we probably will go back to having a fairly regular in-office requirement. We've also grown quite a bit over COVID, so our current office space won't accommodate everyone. So I think it's interesting to see how it evolves. I'm sure there will be more flexibility than there was before, but especially when you're small and like those kind of collaborative elements that Marisa mentioned, there's definitely times when it's really helpful to have everyone in the same room with like sticky notes and a whiteboard. But equally, when you're in crunch time trying to conduct some analysis for a client report, it's much more helpful to be able to just, you know, mute your Slack or Teams and focus at home.
Okay. Thank you all so much. So given the time right now, we're thinking about stopping the recording for the sort of official part of this panel and then letting people come forward with questions. We also have some additional questions we may want to ask, but just to kind of open this up. So just want to thank the panel and thank our audience. I'm going to stop the recording.